Helen Mirren has lived long enough to watch parts of the world that shaped her disappear. She became Jane Tennison. She became the Queen. She became one of the most celebrated actresses of her generation, and seemed almost beyond time's reach. But time takes what fame cannot protect. Fewer and fewer people remain who remember Helen before the fame arrived. Friends who shared stages, laughter, and whole chapters of life slowly became memories themselves. Now, at 81, Helen is still working, still refusing to become smaller with age. Yet the circle she once knew by heart grows smaller. The awards remain, the performances remain. So do the empty places no achievement can fill. And one unsettling question still has no answer. How many goodbyes can Helen Mirren carry before the world she loves begins to feel unfamiliar? Before we begin, honor Helen Mirren with a like. A tribute to a woman who has spent more than 6 decades refusing to let age define her limits. Exile had already shaped Helen Mirren's family before her life began. On July 26, 1945, she was born in Hammersmith, London, into a country only beginning to move out of war and into an uneasy peace. Her father, Vasily Petrovich Mironov, later Basil Mirren, came from a Russian aristocratic family stranded in Britain by revolution. Her mother, Kathleen Kitty Rogers, came from working-class West Ham and was the 13th of 14 children. Helen's paternal grandfather had served Imperial Russia and was in Britain on official business when the 1917 revolution severed the road home. Status, land and belonging became things remembered rather than inherited. Basil had played viola with the London Philharmonic before the war. During the war, he served as an ambulance driver. Afterward came the practical work required to support a family. Driving a taxi, working as a driving test examiner, and eventually entering the civil service. Helen would later speak of a painful sense of non-realized potential, especially in her father. She grew up with the knowledge that he had once made room for art in his life, and that survival had gradually required him to make room for other things instead. Growing up in Britain required the family to make another choice about what could be preserved and what had to change. Helen was raised in Leigh-on-Sea, Essex, between an older sister and a younger brother, while Russia survived inside the family through stories, memory, and a grandfather who could still describe a world his grandchildren would never inherit. Her father chose assimilation. In 1951, the family name was legally changed from Mironov to Mirren. One generation remembered the country it had lost. The next tried to make its children's future easier by allowing part of the old identity to recede. The family was not well off, and Helen later recalled a childhood largely removed from television, cinema, and much of the popular culture surrounding other children. At St. Bernard's Convent School, discipline was strict. At home, education, independence, and seriousness mattered. Mirren has described the household as strongly anti-monarchist, an irony that would become impossible to ignore once Queens began defining her career. Around 13, an amateur production of Hamlet opened another world to her. Shakespeare offered scale where ordinary life felt narrow: power, grief, desire, betrayal, danger. For a girl who often felt inhibited, acting revealed an unexpected freedom. Stepping into another person's life could make her bolder than remaining inside the limits she felt in her own. Acting turned that discovery into a conflict with the people who understood insecurity well enough to fear what the profession could cost her. Helen performed at school, but her parents had little reason to romanticize an uncertain theatrical life. Her mother's warning stayed with her: people like us aren't actors. There was no family fortune waiting to finance drama school. So Helen entered a teacher training college in London and followed the safer path for a time. Yet safety never settled the question. At 18, she auditioned for the National Youth Theatre without telling her parents because, as she later admitted, "I didn't want to fail publicly." She was accepted. The offer promised no salary, no permanent career, and no protection from disappointment. But it gave Helen a first chance to choose uncertainty for herself. Basil had once known what it meant to put artistic possibility behind practical necessity. His daughter was now moving in the opposite direction, accepting risk, because she had already seen what a life shaped entirely by caution might cost. Her family had changed its name so the next generation could belong more easily in Britain. Now Helen was entering a profession where the name Mirren meant nothing, and where she would have to give it meaning herself. Opportunity did not rescue Helen Mirren from vulnerability. It exposed her to a new form of it. In 1964, while still an emerging actress, she attended a casting encounter with director Michael Winner that remained vivid enough for her to describe with anger more than 4 decades later. Mirren said she had been mortified and incredibly angry by the way her body was scrutinized, and said no actress should be treated like a piece of meat. Winner disputed parts of her recollection, but Mirren's memory of humiliation endured long enough for her to speak about it publicly in 2007. She had fought to enter a profession built on being seen. Very quickly, she learned how far visibility could drift from dignity. Talent, discipline, and ambition could earn a young woman access to the room. They could not guarantee how the room would look at her once she entered it. She had been allowed into the profession. Respect was another matter. In 1965, the risk finally acquired a name, Cleopatra. At 20, Mirren was cast as the Egyptian queen in the National Theatre's Antony and Cleopatra at the Old Vic. What followed came quickly. 1964, humiliation. 1965, Cleopatra. Then attention. Then representation. Then repertory work in Manchester. Then the Royal Shakespeare Company. The role became the decisive launch point of her professional life. It also carried an irony her childhood could never have predicted. Her family had descended from a Russian world where rank and inheritance once mattered, only to lose that world and rebuild in England. Her father had put aside a viola because survival required something more practical. Her mother had warned that people like us did not become actors. Now Helen was beginning to earn her place by playing one of Shakespeare's most formidable queens. Cleopatra did not erase class, fear, or humiliation. It gave Helen something far harder to dismiss. Evidence that the door could open because of what she could do. Cleopatra opened the profession to Helen. The next test was whether she could remain there on the strength of her work. Repertory theater and the Royal Shakespeare Company demanded repetition, stamina, and the willingness to be judged again and again. Decades later, Mirren described the deeper arc of that life, with a line more revealing than any myth of effortless confidence. "I think a lot of my life, and especially my work life, has been spent learning how to be brave." That sentence reaches directly back to the 18-year-old, who had hidden her National Youth Theatre audition because she feared failing where everyone could see. Courage had not arrived fully formed. She had begun learning it. Another audition, another rehearsal, another role, another room in which she had to prove she belonged. The humiliation of 1964 had shown her that opportunity did not automatically bring dignity. Cleopatra had shown her that ability could answer doubt, but it could not guarantee what came next. The door had opened. Staying inside it and deciding how much of herself she would refuse to surrender would become the next battle. By the mid-1970s, Helen Mirren had already built serious stage credentials with the Royal Shakespeare Company, yet public attention repeatedly returned to her appearance. In 1975, Michael Parkinson introduced her through reviews that emphasized how she looked, then questioned whether her physical attributes might prevent audiences from accepting her as a serious actress. Mirren challenged the premise instead of accepting it. Decades later, she remembered that first talk show appearance as terrifying, and was struck by how firmly her younger self resisted the frame being imposed on her. The pressure was no longer confined to casting rooms or private judgments. It was unfolding in public, with millions able to hear the question. Caligula brought a different kind of scrutiny in 1979. The film became notorious for controversial material and a chaotic production. Yet Helen never recast her participation as a private catastrophe. She later called making it a great experience, and said she had never denigrated the film. Through both episodes, the same professional problem remained. how to keep the work from being reduced to whatever other people found easiest to discuss about her. Jane Tennison gave Helen a role large enough to turn that struggle into authority. Excalibur expanded her film profile in 1981. Cal brought her Best Actress at Cannes in 1984. And The Madness of King George later earned her an Academy Award nomination. Then Prime Suspect arrived in 1991. Across a story that returned over 15 years and concluded with the final act in 2006, Tennison led major criminal investigations while working inside institutions resistant to female authority. Helen later said the series resonated because women in many professions recognized their own struggle in Tennison. She won 3 consecutive BAFTA Television Awards early in the run, and later an Emmy for its final chapter. One of writer Linda LaPlante's most revealing instructions to Helen was only 2 words: "Don't smile." Tennison would not soften herself merely to make professional authority more comfortable for the people around her. The actress once publicly questioned about whether appearance might undermine seriousness, had become the face of a woman whose seriousness could no longer be negotiated away. The Queen brought the most visible confirmation of how far that fight had carried her. Her 2006 portrayal of Queen Elizabeth II brought the Academy Award for Best Actress, the Golden Globe, the BAFTA, and the Screen Actors Guild Award. Caligula, The Parkinson Interview, Uneven Film Fortunes, and the years in which television supplied some of her richest work remained part of the road behind that victory. The Oscar changed the scale on which the industry now had to measure her. A woman once asked publicly whether appearance might stand between her and serious acting had reached its highest level of recognition without allowing that old question to define the answer. In 2026, more than 6 decades after her earliest stage work, she received the Cecil B. DeMille Award. Elsewhere, Helen reduced professional endurance to something characteristically practical. Be on time and don't be an ass. The bluntness feels closer to the career itself than any legend of effortless greatness. She kept returning to the work after judgment, controversy, acclaim, and reinvention. And one man who knew her during that climb would remember what no trophy could preserve: the private years when his own dream of becoming an actor was still being spoken aloud at home. The set of Excalibur changed Helen's private life as well as her career. A young Liam Neeson saw her approaching in full Morgana costume and later admitted, "I was smitten." He was still near the beginning of his screen career. Helen was already an established stage and film performer. Their connection quickly became far more substantial than an on-set romance. Decades later, when a television host referred to them as having dated, Helen corrected him. "We didn't date, we lived together. We were a serious item for a while." They shared a home for roughly 4 years. Liam remembered parts of that life with warmth, including traveling through France with Helen and camping together. Helen remembered another side of those years, the futures they talked about before either of them knew how events would unfold. Liam imagined becoming the kind of actor who might one day ride across open country in an American movie. At the time, Helen considered that future extraordinarily unlikely. She knew him before the image became a career, while the life he wanted existed mostly in conversations they shared at home. Different stages of ambition placed their life under pressures that neither actor has needed to turn into a villain story. Helen already possessed the professional recognition Liam was trying to reach, and years later she acknowledged that he had been living partly in the shadow of her established career. She understood that he needed to step out from under her wing and become fully himself. That made the ending harder because affection had survived the strain. By 1985, the relationship had ended. Helen's own words decades later carry more weight because they refused to rewrite those years as failure. "We were not meant to be together in that way, but we loved each other very, very much." Then she added, "I love him deeply to this day." Their separation did not require either person to become the villain of the memory. Helen could believe in the man Liam hoped to become and understand that his path might have to continue beyond the home and life they had shared. Time eventually completed the part of the story they could not have seen while living it. Liam built the career he had once described to Helen when it sounded remote. In 2025, she said it was extraordinary to see that dream come true. Neeson has returned that respect, calling her a remarkable woman and saying, "I should be so lucky and be honored to have spent 3 or 4 years with that lady." Then Helen gave their relationship its clearest measure more than 4 decades after it began. "I will love Liam until the day I die." Neither of them needed the old relationship restored for those words to remain true. Both moved forward. Both built other lives. The years together stayed intact without being rewritten as bitterness or regret. Some people leave the life you are building with them and remain inside the life you become. Helen Mirren's first meeting with Taylor Hackford began with irritation rather than romance. Around the time one chapter of her private life was closing, she auditioned for Hackford's White Nights. He kept her waiting, and Helen did not hide her anger. "I was very angry," she recalled. "I was sort of rude." Hackford remembered the meeting much the same way. She was furious, read beautifully, got the part, and left. They began dating in 1986 and moved into a Los Angeles home that year. What grew between them was shaped less by rescue than by timing. Both had already built careers, habits, and identities before their lives joined. Helen later admitted that she sometimes wished they had met earlier. Taylor answered that if they had, they might not still be together. With time, she came to believe he was right. Meeting later meant that each had already learned how to occupy a life alone before asking another person to share it. The years they had lived separately had given them identities that did not depend on the relationship for definition. By the time they chose to stand together, neither needed the other to become smaller in order for the relationship to last. Motherhood remained a more complicated question because Helen never experienced it as a simple absence. She has said plainly, "I never felt the need for a child and never felt the loss of it," explaining that acting consumed so much of her attention that she could not imagine bringing a child into that life without risking letting the child down. Yet the possibility stayed open in her mind for years. Maybe next year, she remembered thinking, until really there was no next year. Nothing dramatic marked the moment when possibility became past tense. The years simply accumulated until the choice was no longer available in the same way. Later, Ron Howard's parenthood unexpectedly touched a part of that experience she had rarely needed to examine. Helen said, "She sobbed for about 20 minutes over the fact that I never experienced it." She did not turn that reaction into a judgment on the life she had chosen. Motherhood had never governed her decisions. Yet there could still be grief for an experience that had become permanently unreachable. Taylor's sons, Rio and Alexander, entered Helen's life on their own terms, rather than as substitutes for something missing. They widened the meaning of family. Helen has said that one of the things she admired most about Taylor was his absolute, total commitment to his children, and over the years she became part of the close-knit world around them. The family Helen eventually belonged to did not resemble the future she had once postponed with, "maybe next year." It had taken another shape, and become no less real because of it. Commitment eventually became marriage, but only after more than a decade together. Helen and Taylor married on December 31, 1997, after realizing, as she later put it, that they were going to be together forever. Practical legal considerations and the wishes of their families mattered too. Helen joked that marriage had once seemed about as appealing as turnips until she found the right turnip. Their longevity never depended on constant togetherness. Both careers repeatedly carried them to different places, and Mirren has described a marriage spacious enough for closeness and independence at the same time. During the COVID-19 shutdown, she joked that the family wondered what would happen when she and Taylor suddenly had to spend month after month under one roof. Instead, she said, it was fabulous. More recently, she explained the balance with characteristic clarity. She loved having him beside her, and she also loved being alone, because both of them understood the need for space without mistaking it for distance. Nearly 4 decades after they began dating, the relationship had survived work, separation, aging, and the ordinary friction of two strong personalities, without requiring either person to disappear inside the other. Around them, family accumulated almost quietly. Taylor's sons, their partners, grandchildren, Helen's relatives and friendships carried across decades. What had begun with anger in an audition room had become a life large enough to hold partnership, freedom, and a family Helen had never planned in advance. Then, after decades of building that family together, one of its central figures would be gone. On April 14, 2022, Rio Hackford, Taylor's elder son, an actor and bar owner, husband to Libby and father to Waylon and Buck, died at 51. Helen had never reduced his place in her life to the word stepson. Her official website later described the 4 years before his death as a brave and deeply challenging battle with uveal melanoma, a rare and aggressive eye cancer. The disease carried a particularly painful lesson for the family. Rio had gone 10 years without an eye examination because his eyesight had not changed. Helen later explained that this form of melanoma can develop at the back of the eye without producing an obvious change in vision. By the time the family understood what they were confronting, the diagnosis had become part of 4 years of treatment, fear, and uncertainty. 51 was not the future anyone around Rio had imagined for him. He still had a wife, 2 sons, a brother, parents, friends, work, and communities built around his continued presence. His absence reached far beyond one household, because so many lives had already made room for him. One of Rio's most enduring places in Helen's life now fits inside the phone she carries. Her first public tribute was Spare, Rio's photograph and the words El Rio. Later, Helen and Taylor said they were heartbroken and remembered him through the generosity and community he created around himself. Rio had acted in Pretty Woman, Swingers, True Detective, and The Mandalorian, but acting was only part of the life people mourned. Across New Orleans, Los Angeles, Long Beach, and San Francisco, he had created bars and gathering places that made him a familiar presence far beyond a film set. Helen's official tribute described someone with an unusual instinct for hospitality, music, and people, at the center of an extensive community of friends and patrons. Years after his death, many of those friends remained part of Helen and Taylor's lives. In 2025, Helen said she kept Rio's picture as the screensaver on her phone. "I look at his face all the time, every day," she said. The ordinary act of opening a phone had become one place where memory and daily life continued to meet. The Pacific Ocean gave the family another way to carry his memory. Helen said Rio loved going into the water, so the family returns there, and the men enter the ocean in his honor. His illness also changed what Helen and Taylor wanted other families to understand. "We didn't know about that condition," Helen said of uveal melanoma, explaining that Rio's vision had appeared normal despite the disease. After his death, Helen and Taylor urged people to undergo regular eye examinations. By 2025, Helen's own appeal had become even more urgent, encouraging checks twice a year. The warning came from knowledge their family had acquired at a devastating price. Rio's friends remained around them. His sons continued growing older. The ocean became a ritual in his name. And knowledge their family had learned too late became knowledge they could pass forward, hoping another person might discover the danger sooner than they had. Family grief had another, older shape in Helen Mirren's life. The father she lost before the world fully understood what his daughter would become. Basil Mirren died in 1980 at 67. Helen was 35, already respected on stage and screen, yet still 11 years away from prime suspect and 27 years from the Academy Award for The Queen. He had seen the beginning, the daughter who chose an uncertain profession, built a stage reputation, and began finding her place on screen. What he never saw was the scale that life would eventually reach. He never saw Jane Tennison become one of television's defining female characters. He never saw the damehood. He never saw Helen walk onto the Academy Awards stage after playing the very monarch her anti-monarchist household could once have regarded with suspicion. Decades later, Helen spoke about his death without theatrical language. "He wasn't young, but I would have loved to have had him around longer," she said. The wish outlived every milestone that followed. Time kept enlarging the distance between what he had witnessed and what his daughter eventually became. A new role could arrive, an honor could be announced, a career could grow larger than either of them had once imagined, and Basil would still be absent from the moment. Helen's greatest recognition came late enough for that absence to keep changing shape. The public saw achievement accumulating. Privately, each new chapter also belonged to a future her father had never reached. He had once known what it meant for artistic possibility to bend around practical necessity. Helen's life moved in the opposite direction, toward a career that kept expanding long after his ended. By the time she reached 80, more than 4 decades separated her from his death, while the central wish had hardly changed. She would have liked more time with him. Success could lengthen a career, enlarge a reputation, and carry the Mirren name around the world. It could never give Basil one more year in which to see what his daughter became. If his absence revealed how late some triumphs can arrive, her mother's influence would survive in a far more complicated form. Kathleen "Kitty" Rogers remained one of the most complicated forces in Helen's emotional life, because affection, criticism, and determination could exist in the same relationship. Helen remembered her mother as passionate and imaginative, yet capable of judgments sharp enough that the children learned ways of protecting themselves. "I don't think my mother was a natural mother," Helen later admitted. The sentence resists any easy version of what existed between them. Kathleen could make her daughter withdraw, yet she was equally determined that Helen become independent enough to survive a world that would not automatically make room for her. She found money for elocution lessons, insisted on proper speech, valued education, and helped create a home where conversation could reach toward life and art and the soul. Helen entered adulthood carrying both sides of that inheritance: the sensitivity produced by criticism and the discipline that helped her withstand judgment far beyond the family home. Kathleen lived to 87 and died in 1996. 5 years after Prime Suspect had transformed the scale of Helen's public life. But before the Queen, the Oscar, and the extraordinary late career chapter still waiting ahead. Her final choices reflected the practical, unsentimental streak Helen remembered. Kathleen asked for no funeral and donated her body to science. Yet another sentence endured far longer: never be afraid of getting older. Helen repeated that advice decades later, explaining that each age can contain experiences the younger self cannot yet imagine. Their relationship never had to become uncomplicated for those words to matter. Kathleen could wound and strengthen her daughter in the same lifetime. By the time Helen reached old age herself, one of the women who had challenged her most had also left behind one of the ideas that helped her resist the expectation that age should make a woman quieter or less visible. Kathleen had taught Helen not to fear growing older. Soon, a younger life inside the same family would show her what that privilege meant when someone else was denied the chance to reach it. Kathleen's warning never to fear growing older acquired a harsher meaning in 2002, when Helen's younger brother Peter died of skin cancer at 54. Peter belonged to the small group of people who had known her before the National Youth Theatre, the Royal Shakespeare Company, Jane Tennison, the Queen, and international recognition changed the scale of her public life. His death came while Helen was working on Calendar Girls, a film built around a real cancer bereavement and women trying to transform private loss into help for others. The parallel was painfully close. On screen, Helen was helping tell a story about grief finding public purpose. Away from the production, her own family was losing Peter. He was 54. There would be no later chapter in which her younger brother became an old man and looked back with her on the life they had shared. More than 2 decades later, Helen could measure her own aging against an age Peter had never passed. As you travel through life, you realize death is absolutely part of life, she said in 2025. while acknowledging the particular tragedy of death arriving young. By then, Helen had lived 26 years beyond Peter's final age. Kathleen's old advice, never be afraid of getting older, now carried a different weight. Growing older meant another year to work, to change, to make a mistake, to laugh, to discover what came next. Peter had received 54 years. Helen had been given decades more. Her response remained unmistakably her own. I never wanted to die young. I'm too curious about life. I want to see what happens next. She continued accepting work, traveling and speaking openly about age while resisting expectation that an older woman should quietly withdraw. She could not give Peter another year. She could inhabit the years that continued reaching her. Kathleen had taught her not to fear old age. Peter's 54 years gave that lesson, a measure Helen could never forget. As the years passed, loss began to reach beyond Helen Mirren's family and into the world that had shaped her career. Alan Rickman died on January 14, 2016, at 69 from pancreatic cancer, an illness he had kept largely private. In 1998, he stepped in as Antony opposite Mirren's Cleopatra at Britain's National Theatre, after the original actor left the production, taking on an emotionally demanding role at short notice and, as Helen remembered, giving himself to the work with extraordinary generosity. The commanding presence audiences associated with his voice belonged to a man she remembered off stage as very twinkly and kind and gossipy and generous. Someone who loved restaurants, wine, and long conversations about actors, directors, and plays. Years later, both appeared in Eye in the Sky, though Helen remained deeply disappointed that they never shared a scene. After Alan was gone, that missed opportunity acquired a permanence it had never possessed before. There would be no later production to reunite them, no new dinner, no fresh argument about theater, no chance to add another chapter to a friendship built across the stage and the years. The performances survived. So did the stories and the details that rarely enter a career retrospective. For Helen, one of those details was small enough to fit around a wrist. At the end of Antony and Cleopatra, Alan had given her an antique bracelet, old, slightly broken, beautiful, and, she said, so classically Alan. In a career filled with grand roles, celebrated names and honors, memory returned her to something intimate, a gift from one actor to another, still carrying the unmistakable personality of the friend who had chosen it. 8 years after Alan Rickman's death, Helen Mirren faced another painful goodbye when Donald Sutherland died on June 20, 2024, at 88 after a long illness. His connection with Mirren reached much farther back than The Leisure Seeker. They had played husband and wife in Bethune, The Making of a Hero in 1990, then reunited nearly 3 decades later as an aging married couple confronting illness, memory, and mortality on one final road trip. Their faces had changed and their careers had deepened, yet the rapport between them still carried humor. Sutherland once called Mirren dangerously attractive, and she answered with characteristic wit. After his death, Helen chose simpler words. She praised his intelligence, sensitivity, and seriousness, then said, "He was my colleague and became my friend. I will miss his presence in this world." Helen had known Donald across decades, through different ages and different versions of both their careers. Their films could still be watched. Old scenes could still place them together on a screen. The jokes could still be remembered by those who heard them. Film could preserve the work, the faces, and the voices. What it could never restore was the man who had once stood beside her, making more of it. By then, Helen had spent more than half a century entering rehearsal rooms and film sets beside people who had gradually become part of the history of her own working life. Donald was now part of that history as well. His performances remained visible. The friend Helen had known across those decades was gone. Yet Helen's life did not narrow around the past. At 81, success has given her something fame alone never could: the freedom to decide what is still worth protecting, supporting, and making visible. In July 2026, she and Taylor Hackford relisted their longtime Hollywood Hills estate for $12 million. the home they had owned for 3 decades and the first they shared together. Built in 1911 for silent film star Dustin Farnham, the house carries a piece of Hollywood history that Helen once approached entirely from the outside and eventually came to inhabit on her own terms. Another place now carries a different kind of meaning. In Puglia, where Helen and Taylor restored a farmhouse, Xylella disease devastated the surrounding olive groves and killed scores of their own trees. Helen responded by supporting Save the Olives, lending her public voice to an effort rooted not in celebrity but in preservation. The impulse is revealing. After a life spent building a career, her attention increasingly extends toward what can still be protected rather than what has already been achieved. The same independence appears in the way she has approached aging. Through L'Oréal Paris, she has continued challenging the expectation that older women should retreat from visibility. And in 2026, she described longevity as being active, proactive, and productive. At 81, those words are no longer an aspiration. They describe the way she is living. She can choose where she spends her time, what landscapes she helps defend, which causes receive her name, which work deserves another commitment, and how visibly an older woman intends to remain in public life. After decades in which success was measured by roles, awards, and recognition, choice itself has become one of its clearest rewards. The houses and honors record what Helen Mirren achieved. What she chooses to protect, support, and continue now reveals what achievement has allowed her to become. Work has not become a museum of Helen Mirren's past. In January 2026, she received the Cecil B. DeMille Award and entered the year as a Golden Globe nominee for Mobland. Yet one of Hollywood's most honored actresses admits that a new job can leave her absolutely terrified. "Every project that you go into is an unknown," she explained, "because experience cannot guarantee the chemistry, the material, or the performance." That mixture of fear and excitement continues to draw her forward. Mobland returns for Season 2 on September 18, 2026, with Mirren again playing Maeve Harrigan, while A Talent for Murder, in which she portrays Patricia Highsmith, is headed to the Toronto International Film Festival. At 81, uncertainty is no longer an obstacle she expects experience to remove. It remains part of the reason the work matters. A long life has also taught her what success cannot preserve. Some people who knew her before the acclaim never lived to see its greatest chapters. Others disappeared from the family, friendships and working world that had seemed permanent while they were being built. No award can restore those years. What remains within Helen's control is the use of the years still reaching her. 6 decades after the young woman who hid an audition because she feared failing publicly walked toward the National Youth Theater, fear has not vanished. She simply learned to keep moving while it was present. Age changed the conditions of her life, but it did not end the work. Loss changed who remained beside her, but it did not close the future. The world that shaped Helen Mirren has grown quieter in places, but Helen has not withdrawn from it. At 81, she is still entering the next room, accepting the next role, and leaving part of her story unwritten. If Helen Mirren's journey stayed with you, leave a like and tell us which part of her story you will carry with you. And wherever you are watching from, may your days be peaceful, your heart be happy, and may you and the people you love be blessed with good health, strength, and a little more luck in the days ahead.